Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Isn't it a beautiful day today?
Yeah.
I guess it's one of those beautiful fall days. I just have a few announcements. Most of them are printed in the bulletin, but remember today, after church, we have fellowship snacks, and you're all invited to come. I think we have prime rib and
Filet mignon, yeah.
filet.
Almost. We almost have that in there.
Yeah.
It's actually a real full meal deal today. It's more than snacks. It's
Oh,
hot foods and the whole bit. So
okay.
it's going to be good.
We need to remember the coat project. They're only accepting new coats this year because of COVID. And also remember those still affected by COVID. We have personally heard so many people dying of COVID in the last 4 months, I think. People personally connected to either us or Marlon. Anyway, that's really hard to take when you have a family member die of COVID. And most of them did not have vaccines. So, of course, it's up to the individual, but I was talking to my doctor this week on Wednesday, Dr. Shannon. He got COVID, and then he got a vaccine, and he consulted someone in the virology department, and they said if you have COVID and you have a vaccine, your antibodies are super high, which is good. Very unlikely that you'll get COVID, although there is a third variant now. Did they give it a name, Lee?
No.
Charlene gave it a name of Lambda, so I'll stick with that. But there's a third variant now, so we still have to be somewhat cautious. Okay, Lee will have the rest.
All right. I've got a letter here that was from Geraldine Mitchell's family. She, of course, died recently and was buried up in Oklahoma, I believe. But she wrote a letter back, or she didn't. Some of her family members did. We're not into seances right now, so. But and she wrote it to Jane, but it goes to the whole congregation. Pastor Gary asked me to read this because he has still trouble reading, but he does have a cataract surgery scheduled for maybe a couple of weeks from now, so we may actually see him reading print again one of these days. But this says, I appreciate everything that you, Jane, and the church did for Geraldine. She really enjoyed her time with the church family. She would frequently tell me about staying for the meal after morning church services. We received many sympathy cards from the Sunday school class members. Many had extra comments about their time with Geraldine. We appreciate each one. Please pass on our thanks to each and every one of the members. So all of you who knew her or wrote a card to her, or the family appreciates that very much. We have our other prayer needs there. We still see Cindy over here. We still want to remember the Templemans as they are in their struggles continuing, and don't want to forget them. Keep them in our thoughts and prayers, of course. And the updates there, Sandy Daniels is doing better. And Pastor Fernando, I brought that to you a couple of weeks ago. And Crossing Borders Ministry was able to send them some money about a week ago to help with some medical tests that he's having to undergo. for his conditions, that they're still trying to get a handle on what it is. Those are the two updates that I've got, and that's all I know. Anybody else have a prayer need or an update from the floor, as it were?
Is this Ed Jacobs, not Miss Hill, this is Sue's?
It's
It's not Sue Hill.
no, it's this Sue's relative.
And he's home and recovering.
Yeah, he's home and recovering now. He's been home and out, but now he's home again. So hopefully this will be the real recovery this time. They've had to keep taking him back to the emergency room other times. So. He had pneumonia and COVID, and that was not a good combination. And he's elderly, so.
Just a quick update. Tony went back last week and saw the hematologist. I think I kind of shared some of that with some of the members. And now we're waiting on a CT scan because there's some issue with a blood clot to his liver.
Blood clot? You're going to check to see if there's blood clot.
Well, they saw it in the scan when they did the little GI pill through his body. They saw it then, but they still haven't done anything. So they're going to do another CT scan and see if maybe because he's been on blood thinners, they're hoping that maybe it has
Dissolved away, but yeah.
It's been about a month, and I'm thinking something should have happened if it was going to happen. So
Okay.
hopefully they'll see that it's dissolved.
Gone. Well, good.
Or
Well,
reduced in size.
sure. One thing after another.
His doctor told him this week, because he went back to his regular doctor, and he said, you have a few things going on. He said, I know, I realize that, but we're just taking them one at a time.
Yeah, that's all you can do, isn't it? Deal with the ones that are in your face right then, yeah.
Yes.
Well, we keep praying that God would just heal all that, of course, and
It's possible.
make that disappear. So,
Yes, it is.
and if not, that He'll make a way for Tony to get the relief that he needs. Yeah. Jessie this morning, Jessie Herndon was telling me she wasn't feeling good. She had some chest pains and been dealing with some issues this week, last few days. Nothing strong. She didn't think to have a heart attack, but just let you know. We're all getting a little older, and I bet I would go to everybody in this room and you can tell me something that hurts or is not working right. So that's the way it is. Let's go to prayer then. Wonderful Almighty God, we are very grateful for your presence in our lives, the fact that you are real and that you are there and that you are here with us, with all your creation, with every person that you've made, that you say you'll never leave us or forsake us, and you're not far from us. We thank you for that. We thank you for the care that you give to us, sometimes even when we don't realize the care is coming from you. We look back and we see those things that make a pattern and that are your hand at work. So we thank you for that, and we ask for your hand to be at work in each of these instances that we've mentioned, and in other instances that each of us is aware of in our personal and individual lives as well. Let people who may not see you in action in their lives come to know you and to feel your love. We look forward to the rest of our gathering, of our worship service today, and do help us to worship you in spirit and in truth. Be with our songs that we sing, the prayers that are offered, the speaking that is given, everything that happens, and just thank you for each person involved in helping this service to be an honor and a glory to you. We thank you for this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. It's your turn to talk.
Yeah, I know.
We're supposed to be quiet.
Oh, no, you're not. Is this good? What? Okay. Every week, I know when this is coming out, and I watch down, and every week it's like, it's my turn now, Okay, hi y'all, and hi y'all in computer land and everything. Well, the title of this, The Struggles of Our Life, it sounds kind of, doesn't it? Kind of sad, doesn't it? A little bit. Well, it's not. It's a sweet little story. Have you ever been around a teenager that's 13 and going on 30? Can y'all relate to something like that, So, okay, well, keep that in mind as I go through this, okay? Well, one time, there was a daughter, and she complained to her father that her life was miserable, and she didn't know how she was going to make it. She was so tired of fighting and struggling all the time. It seemed that just as one problem was solved, another one soon followed. Can y'all relate to that? Yeah, sure. I think everybody can. Her father, he was a chef. He took her into the kitchen. He filled 3 pots with water. 3, okay? And he placed each pot on high heat. Once the pots began to boil, he placed potatoes in one pot, eggs in the second pot, and ground coffee beans in the third. And then he let them sit and boil without saying a word to his daughter. Well, she moaned and groaned, and you know how look like, moaned and groaned, wondering what in the world is he doing now? And after she had a watch on too, by the way, and after 20 minutes, he turned off the heat. He took the potatoes out and placed them into a bowl. Then he pulled the eggs out and placed them into a bowl. And he ladled the coffee and placed it into a cup. He turned to his daughter and said, "Daughter, what do you see?" Well, she said, "Potatoes, eggs, and coffee." Well, look closer. Touch the potatoes. Well, she did, and she noticed that they were soft. Then he asked her to take an egg and break it. After pulling off the shell, she observed the hard-boiled egg. Finally, he asked her to take a sip of the coffee. Well, the sweet aroma brought a smile to her face. It's probably about time, wasn't it? And she said, "Father, what does this mean?" Then he explained that the potatoes and the eggs and the coffee had each faced the same adversity in the boiling water. However, each one reacted differently. The potatoes went in strong, but in the boiling water, they became weak. The eggs, they were fragile, with the outer shell protecting its liquid interior until they were put into the boiling water. Then the inside of the egg became hard. However, the coffee beans, they were unique. After they were exposed to the boiling water, they changed the water and became something new, creating something new. "Which one are you?" he asked his daughter. When adversity knocks on your door, how do you respond? Are you a potato, or an egg, or a coffee bean? In life, things happen, all around us, and there's really, the only thing that you can really do is what you choose to do and how you choose to react and what you choose to make out of it. Making something positive and experiencing something positive. Thank you, and I hope you receive a blessing from this little story. Thank you.
Well, I was about halfway up here. Lee says, go sit down. So I sat down. Okay. I'm reading Psalm 119, verses 169 through 176. It says, may my cry come before you, Lord. Give me understanding according to your word. May my supplication come before you. Deliver me according to your promise. May my lips overflow with praise, for you teach me your decrees. May my tongue sing your word, for all your commandments are righteous. May your hand be ready to help me, for I have chosen your precepts. I long for your salvation, Lord, and your law gives me delight. Let me live that I may praise you, and may your laws sustain me. I have strayed like a lost sheep. Seek your servant, for I have not forgotten your commands.
All that ties together great. Thanks for the song, Cheryl. So at home, I go through the Bible and read it. That's kind of probably y'all do too. And the way I'm doing it right now is I read something out of the Old Testament, and then I read something out of the book of Psalms, which is in the Old Testament, obviously, but I do that separate, and then I read something out of the New Testament each day. So I was reading recently through Psalm 119, which, as Cheryl says, is the longest, I think it's the longest book in the whole Bible, actually, much less just in the book of Psalms. Thing goes on for pages and pages, and it's called the Alphabet Song because there's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and this is written in stanzas of 8 lines per stanza for the 22 letters, and that makes 176 verses. So that's why that's all lined out the way it is. But it was interesting. I got to the very end of that book, that very, very long book. It talks a lot about God's law and obeying God's law and being blessed for obeying God's law. And if you remember, and I'll come back to this again, but at the very end, Mom says, seek me, for I am lost. And I want to talk today about seeking God. And we have different maybe views of how that's done or how important that is or how God responds to our seeking and how much responsibility we have to seek and where does the responsibility lie in God's part of the equation as well. So just here in the book of Psalms, there's dozens of places where this theme is played out in the sense that often early in the psalm, David's very despondent. He's, where are you, God? What are you doing? I can't see you anywhere. And then generally later in the psalm, sometimes in the same book or a book soon thereafter, a chapter, he'll answer his own question. Many times. So my wife likes to say that David was probably bipolar because he gets really negative sometimes and then boom, he pops back up the other way. So for instance, and I could pull dozens of these, but in Psalm 10, the very first verse says, why, Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? He says something like that in Psalm 13, the first verse. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? And over in Psalm 22, which is probably one of the most famous quotes in the Bible because Jesus used it on the cross, the first couple of verses, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer. By night, but I find no rest. So that's the way many of the chapters start off. God, why have you forsaken me? Where are you? I'm looking for you and I can't see you anywhere. Many times in the Bible, people are told to seek after God. We go back to the nation of Israel, for instance. Many times that Moses talked to the nation, and then those that followed Moses, the judges and the kings and so forth, prophets. How many times were they saying, look, you need to seek after God. You need to get back to seeking God. It talks about seeking his face. Many of those times it talks about seeking his face, and that's an interesting term that we'll touch on. In Psalm 119, the very psalm that Mom was reading from, let me turn over there. It's always easy to easy to find it because it goes on for like 5 or 6 pages. Finding the first part of it can be tricky sometimes. Okay. Psalm 119, verse 2. Blessed are those who keep his statutes and seek him with all their heart, it says. In verse 10, I seek you with all my heart. Do not let me stray from your commands. So at least in many verses like this, there's something about seeking God that has to do with seeing him, believing him, following him, maybe not there, but that we haven't seen his presence. We haven't responded to his presence. There is another famous quote in Jeremiah 29. I'll be turning there. 29, we'll start in verse 11. And if you go in any Bible bookstore or even Walmart these days, you're probably going to see some plaque or a t-shirt or some wall hanging with this quote on there. And verse 11 is going to say, For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Anybody ever heard that? Yeah, it's everywhere. But that's the only verse that's on the plaque usually. But if you continue to read, verse 12, Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me, and you will find me when you seek me with all your heart. Verse 14, I will be found by you, declares the Lord. He will be found by those who seek him. Don't know the exact time frame all the time or what the circumstances may be, but God will be found. So what is involved in our seeking God, and how difficult is it to find him? Maybe you know someone right now, I do, more than one, who is seeking God in their own way, looking to try to find some meaning in life, find out some purpose for some calamity that happened or some struggle they're going through, that, as we heard about in our Sharing Life segment. I think we probably all know someone, maybe in our family, someone close to us, who is needing to find God and who finds himself seeking, but somehow not connecting in the way that they expect. I almost titled this sermon Hide and Seek, because I thought, well, that's kind of catchy, right? Hide and seek. So what kind of God would that be if he was a God of hide and seek? Is that the way God operates? Does he hide? Does he hide? Does he try to be invisible? Does he create confusion around his being? Does he make us jump through hoops? Does understand vague scriptures, know certain doctrines, reach a certain level of goodness before he will reveal himself to us? Does he joy in not being found? Is God's intent to hide from us at the same time that we're trying to seek him? It seems sometimes that that's the way it can be, and David voiced some of that frustration in his Psalms, and in life that can be real too. And there's that game that's called hide and seek, right? Everybody's played hide and seek at some point in your life, right? So you have two parties. You have the hider. That might be you. You're trying to hide from the other person. And you have the finder, the seeker, the one who's looking for you. And the object of the hider, which in our analogy would be God, is to not be found by the seeker. But is that the way God operates? Is that his nature? When we come to read about him in the Bible and we say he's love and we say he cares for all his people, so would it seem like it would be God's nature to run around and try to stay out of sight or hide and make people just look and look and look out of frustration trying to find him? Is that the kind of God that we worship? One that hides from us while we seek him? I think the answer would be no to that. You know, God has always tried to make himself known and seen. You go back to the Garden of Eden. Let's just pick it up with chapter 1. Genesis. God created the man and the woman. He was right there with them. He touched them. He made them. And then what did he do? He walked with them, and he instructed them, and he talked to them. He didn't create them, and when they woke up, they looked around and went, wow, where's God? How do we get here? No, he was there with them, and he was talking to them and helping them. And even after they sinned and after they rejected God, what was his response? He went back into the garden and he called out to them and said, where are you? He was not hiding while they were seeking. They were the ones that might not have been seeking at that point. They were the ones that turned to hiding. But the God is not a hider. With Israel, remember when he was talking to Israel about to give them the 10 Commandments, and it was on the mountain, and it was all kind of scary and spooky, and he said, bring the people in close here so I can talk to them, so I can show them who I am, so I can talk directly to the nation. And the nation did what? Oh, no, not me. This is too dark. This is too scary. There's too much lightning and thunder going on. You know, leave me alone. Leave me out of this. And so Moses went up by himself to talk to God. But not because God was hiding. It's because the people rejected seeing him at that point. God continued to reach out to the people through his judges and his kings and his prophets. And he continued to speak his word, gave his word to the people through all of these channels down through the centuries and even down through the millennia. But the people avoided him and turned from him. He tried to reveal his heart to the nation, and they wouldn't have it even after hundreds of years of trying. And so they went in captivity, and they were gone for a while. And then a man named Jesus showed up later in the history, and what was his purpose? His purpose was to reveal the Father. That's what he came to do. Not to play hide and seek. He came to reveal the Father. That's what he was there for. You know, there's a verse in Luke that says the purpose of Jesus' ministry was to seek and save that which was lost. He didn't come to hide on people and make us run around and try to find out by some mystery or decoding mechanism what he's doing and where he is. He wrote it all out in a book over years and decades and centuries. He sent his very Son to be the revelation of himself. There was no hiding in God. And so the seeking that we're doing is not seeking after a hidden God. It has to be talking about some other kind of seeking. Jesus became God in the flesh. He was so clear. He wanted to be so clear that he came down as one of us to show us who the Father was. And he loved us, and he wanted to take care of us. It says he's like a mother hen who wanted to gather the chicks under her wings and protect them. And so this is not a God who was hiding off in a corner. This was a God who was gathering up and calling in and saying, come to me and let me be your God and let me protect you and take care of you. Any of you ever seen that? Any of you been around chickens enough? You know, when they're in the nest and they have eggs that they're incubating, don't stick your hand in there. No, you'll get pecked because that hen is protecting. You know, and if they're out in the open and you see a shadow of a hawk come flying over, the mother's going to cluck, 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 and those little chicks are going to run over there. And so they know where their mom is. They know they're not looking for her. She's calling out to them, and they're running to her. And that's the way God is to us as well. The parable of the prodigal son. The son disrespects the father, takes his money and runs, as it were, goes about his business. Not another thought other than maybe guilt or shame back to his father. And does the father hide? Does the father make it hard for the son to come back? Does the father say, well, no, keep him outside the gate, you know, he can't come in here? No, it says the father watched every day, looking down the horizon, looking down the trail for the son that had gone away. And when the son came back and he saw him afar off, he went and hid in a closet, right, and locked the gates and said, no, It says he pulled up his robe and he ran out to meet his son. He didn't make his son come look through the castle or the house room by room while he was hiding in a closet or the dryer or somewhere, like my nephews did when they were smaller. He was right there for them to see. In Romans 1, I got to read you this. Sometimes people will say, well, I just can't see anything about God. I mean, he just can't exist because, he hasn't revealed himself to me. Romans 1 has something to say about that. If you start in verse 19, it says this. It says, since what may be known about God is plain to them, to anyone who's looking, to us. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and his divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that the people are without excuse. Sounds simplistic in a way, but when you go outside and you look at a blade of grass or a grasshopper or the sun or a rainbow or a tree leaf or an ear of corn or an ant mound, anywhere you look, and if you stop and think about it, that's God revealing himself. These things could not have happened on their own. They just don't. The whole idea of evolution is patently quite ridiculous when you really start looking into it. And there's no way that, although the educated people seem to believe that evolution's the way, they're not very smart. They may be really educated, but they're not very smart if they can't see God's hand in his miraculous creation. And to know that there has to be a power behind what has been created for us. And that's what he says here, that if we're just even vaguely looking, there's a sense of general revelation, it's called, where everything around us, each other, our personalities, our smiles, our individual features that make us unique from everybody else, that came about through a creation of an almighty God who made it and sustains it. So everything about us tells the story of God, and he's not hiding. There's a verse I love in Acts 17. Paul is speaking to the people of Athens, very intelligent philosophers, ones who have spent their life arguing back and forth about, is there a God, or what's he like, and how do we get to him, and all this kind of stuff. And so Paul's there in the book of Athens, in the country, in the city of Athens, and it's a fairly long exchange with them, but he's talking about how God created everything, and he's not served by human hands. He gives everyone life and breath, and he sustains everything that he's made. He made from one man, he made all the nations and the whole earth. And it comes down to verse 27. And it said, God did this. He made all of this and made it visible. God did this so that they would seek him. They, us, people, humanity, would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any of us. So our reaching and seeking is not hide and seek, because God is not far from anyone who is looking. He's as close as the nearest star, or our view of the nearest star, or whatever else we're looking at or comparing with. So I just find that amazing that God has made himself so visible, so easy to be discovered. Not easy in the sense that we will acknowledge that as God, but easy in the sense that he's very visible and he's very blatant about who he is. If we go on to, we're there in Romans 1, and verse 20 is what we just read. So we might ask the question, why is it so difficult for people to find God, to connect with God, to believe that that is God? Could be various reasons, but this is one that Paul talks about. If we back up a little bit. Now, let's see, that's not right. I'm in the wrong chapter. So it's in Romans, back to Romans. Romans 1, verse 21. We have just read that people are without excuse. That is in the sense that he's right there. And in verse 21 he says, "For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. And although they claimed to be wise, they became fools, and they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images," and so forth. He goes into what happens when God is there and he's visible and he's made himself available, and then we see that, but we say, no, that's not God. That's evolution, or that's philosophy, or that's something to be argued about, instead of just saying, that's amazing, that's astounding, that's God, that's who I've been seeking, he's all around, he's right here, everywhere in my life. But our foolish hearts get rebellious, and sometimes we say it can't be God because he doesn't look like I thought he would. It's not what I expected out of him. It's not what I think I need for me, God, to be. And God says, I'm not your God. I'm the God. And you have to accept me for what I am, God says, not make me into your image of what you want me to be. And I think of people in my life, maybe back to that, maybe you too. Maybe this is some of your history as we've all come along as Christians. Maybe some of this sounds familiar, but especially people who have not yet made that jump to understand who God is and to accept him, that call themselves seekers, but they never find what they're seeking. Maybe you could help them with some of this in their struggles. I have a friend, a longtime friend from childhood, that every now and then we get together, not real often anymore, and when we do, it always turns to the idea of God. And he's struggled his whole life to try to form some sort of a connection. He's a seeker. He's always looking and never unfortunately finding the God that he's looking for. And we get into these deep discussions, and when I'll say something that seems pretty simplistic and out, just the way it is, there's this argument that comes back, and he's a very smart individual, and he's read and he thinks, and circles begin to form in our discussion, and we don't get anywhere because we just keep coming back and, yeah, but if that's the case, then, and then he's got a point that comes in opposition to something that seems to be real clear, and he doesn't mean to be obstinate, but in his mind, he won't accept what's there clearly, and it needs to be on his terms. I think that's what God or Paul means when he says that our own thinking becomes futile. We judge God by our standards. We expect him to meet the criteria that we set forth for him instead of surrendering to who he is. So God is open and evident to everyone. They may not know Jesus Christ unless we tell them about him. But as far as God the Creator, God the Ruler, God the Sustainer, we don't have to seek. We just have to look around for that because he has made himself obvious to us. In actuality, the ultimate seeker is God. He's always sought mankind from Adam and Eve forward. That's been God's intent, was to create a relationship with us. God's nature is that he loves all his creation, including each of us. He loves his kids. He seeks and he calls people to himself. Come to me, all that you are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you peace. Come to me, he says. And he puts himself out there, seeking the lost, reaching out to save the lost. In that psalm, the last verse of 119, I have strayed like a lost sheep. Seek your servant, for I have not forgotten your commands. We ask God to seek us. It can get very tiring seeking after God, but if we realize that he's seeking for us, then our job becomes one of surrendering to that and believing that, rather than proactively trying to accomplish some things to make him visible, to make him become visible to each of us. We ask him to seek us, to open our minds to what he's already revealed all around us. Seeking involves believing and obeying. And I think so many times, and I took a concordance out, one of those things where you look up a word in the Bible and it tells you all the times it's used. And the word seek or seekest, or one of those King James kind of words, it's in there over 100 times. Now a lot of times they're seeking a lost this, or they're seeking a place to stay, but a few dozen times they're talking about seeking God's face, which means they can see God's character, his nature. They can look into, as it were, we can, into God's face, into his eyes, and understand the love that he has for us. And I believe when the Bible's telling us to seek God, they're not meaning he's hiding somewhere, go find him. They're meaning he's right there. Turn your face toward him and you'll see his face turn towards you. Those are in very trying times sometimes. We need to know that. There's a poem Pastor Gary and I were talking about before church. We almost kind of laughed a little bit. It's called The Hound of Heaven. Anyone ever read The Hound of Heaven poem? If you're going to read it, leave yourself some time. It's a long poem. It goes on for stanzas. Mrs. Baker says she's read it. You understood every word of it, right? I didn't. I read that poem. It was written in about 1800 or so by an Englishman named Francis Thompson. And let me tell you a little bit about Francis Thompson's life before we look into the poem. It says this. It says, Thompson's father was a doctor who had converted to Roman Catholicism. Thompson, the son, studied medicine, but he took no real interest in his studies and never practiced as a doctor, moving instead to London, because he was over there in England, to try and become a writer. Here he was reduced to selling matches and newspapers for a living. During this time, he became addicted to opium. He'd had some health trouble, and opium was used as a painkiller, and he became addicted to it. Thompson came to London in 1885. He lived a life of destitution until he was a homeless person. He was living on the streets. Until 1888, he was discovered after he sent some poetry to a magazine. The editor couple, a husband and wife, of the magazine sought him out and rescued him from the verge of starvation and self-destruction. Recognizing the value of his work, the couple gave him a home and arranged for publication of his first book in 1893, his book of poems. A lifetime of extreme poverty, ill health, and his addiction to opium took a heavy toll on Thompson, even though he found success in his last years. Thompson attempted suicide in his nadir of despair. Shortly afterwards, a prostitute, whose identity Thompson never revealed, befriended him, gave him lodgings, and shared her income with him. Salvation from strange places sometimes. Thompson was later to describe her in his poetry as his savior. She soon disappeared, however, never to return. Thompson also lived with some monks for a time, honing his views of God in his life circumstances. He would eventually die from tuberculosis at the age of 48. Rough life. Where was God? Oh God, why have you forsaken me? Where are you in the midst of these trials for this man? And he writes a poem called The Hound of Heaven, where he pictures God as what? A hound? As a dog? What is it about a hound, a bloodhound? What do they do? They seek, they look, they seek, they chase, they chase it down. They stay with it, don't they? We think of, if you watch some of these old movies on TV of the prisoners that escaped the Louisiana prison and they're going out through the swamps, right? Nobody wants to go through the swamps except the hounds. The hounds will go through the swamps. And you can cross the rivers and climb the trees and jump off the cliffs, but those hounds are going to find you and they're going to get you and you're going to end up back in prison again. It's just the way it is. They used to go hunting, and still we go hunting. We take our bird dogs, we take our hound dogs with us, and we send them out to do the dirty work for duck hunting or bird hunting or whatever. And they will go find whatever it is you want them to find and bring it back. Sometimes hounds are used searching for lost people. Kind of an interesting analogy there, isn't it? These children that get lost are adults sometimes, and they'll bring in the dogs, and it may take 2-3 days, and these hounds are sniffing a little here and sniffing a little there, but they don't give up until they're pulled off the case and made to go away, or until they find what they're looking for. They're seeking the one who is lost. And so in this poem called The Hound of Heaven, he's speaking of God and specifically of Jesus Christ. He doesn't name their names in here, but this is the idea that he's telling us. God is like a hound, chasing us, chasing everyone, never giving up, no matter how rejected or how long it takes. Andre, if there's 2 slides here, I want to read through this part of the poem. I'll let you read. You don't have to read it out loud, but just so you can see the words. He writes in kind of King James sort of English. This wasn't back in or Shakespeare's day. It wasn't any of that, but still in his poetry, in this poem, he decided to write in this style. And this is the way the poem starts, The Hound of Heaven. I fled him down the nights and down the days. I fled him down the arches of the years. I fled him down the labyrinthine ways of my own mind, and in the midst of tears, I hid from him, and under running laughter. Up vistas hopes I sped, and shot, precipitated, adown titanic glooms of chasmed fears, from those strong feet that followed after. Notice the capitalization of the word feet. Go ahead with the next slide, if you would. But with unhurrying chase and unperturbed pace, deliberate speed, majestic instancy, they beat. And a voice beat, more instant than the feet. All things betray thee, who betrayest me. Now you have to think, and you have to maybe read. Maybe you caught that the first time through. I haven't. I've gone back, and I'm taking notes. I've started this years ago, trying to figure out what the man's talking about. But when you understand the concept there, with unhurrying chase, this is God. With unperturbed. If you're perturbed, whether you're aggravated, you're just, oh, it bothers me, leave me alone. This God, this hound, is coming after him on these feet. And he's unperturbed, he's deliberate, majestic instancy, and those feet beat. And then he hears a voice that joins in with the feet. All things betray thee that betray me. And there's this repeats several times. This is sort of the chorus, you might say, of the poem. And he'll end up each one of them with a different idea. This is saying, all things betray you who betray me. And my interpretation of that is, when we flee, when we ignore, because he's talking about fleeing, we flee, we ignore, we reject, we remain outside of God's reality and will for us. We chase our own false values and our ideas of success. Can't listen to God, can't listen to the one who's chasing me, who's seeking after me. I've got my own ideas over here. I've got my own priorities. I've got my own idea what success is. But in the end, no matter how much money we make or how many people know our name, those false goals betray us. All things betray you who betray me. If those are not of him, if they're not of God, then they will eventually betray us. And they'll be waste, and they'll be gone, and they won't live outside of this life. Let's go ahead to one more slide. This is later in the poem. He says, nigh and nigh draws the chase, with unperturbed pace, deliberate speed, majestic instancy. And past those noised feet, a voice comes yet more fleet. Lo, naught contents thee, who contents not me. And that's the sort of the opposite. What does content God? What does he offer us for contentment in our life? What has he put out there for us? And we're not going to be content with anything else if it's not something that doesn't content God. Until we surrender to his calling, we'll not find true contentment. God hounds us. He seeks us. He seeks us for our own good. He seeks everyone. He seeks the person in the gutter out there. He seeks the person who declares himself an atheist. He seeks the people in countries with dark religions and false belief systems. He's seeking people who are on the verge of becoming Christians. He never gives up on any of us. He's always there. And if we go back real quickly to Psalms, where we begin this process, I told you that David and the writers of Psalms, David specifically, is kind of bipolar sometimes. But in Psalm chapter 10, where we started out saying, "Why, Lord, do you stand far off?" we see down in verse 17, same chapter, he says, "You, Lord, hear the desire of the afflicted. You encourage them and you listen to their cry." See, David knows that God's there. It just is so frustrating sometimes that he can't feel it in the way he wants to feel it. In chapter 13, we read verse 1, "How long, Lord, will you forget me?" And so forth. And in verse 17, in verse 5 and 6, he comes back with this, "But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me." David knows that God seeks him, and David seeks God. It says David seeks God with an open heart. David was called a man of God because he responded to God's invitation in that way. And in that very famous chapter, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Again, if you read the second half of that chapter, the tone totally switches. And it says in verse 24, "For he has not despised or scorned the suffering of the afflicted one. He has not hidden his face from him, but has listened to his cry for help." That's what God does for you and me. He seeks us, and he wants us to respond by just being open to his seeking. We seek his face based on what we already know about him. We look into his eyes and we see his love. God demonstrates his love for us in this: even while we were sinners, Christ died for us, it says in Romans. He doesn't have to wait for us. He seeks us even while we're turned away from him. And he seeks those around us that we know also. So maybe you or someone you know is seeking hard after God. Maybe you felt it was like your job to find God, to chase him down, to impress him by our actions, to work hard enough that you can somehow catch him and wring some blessings out of him. You hear things like that preached every day. But God is actually chasing you and everyone else. He is initiating the contact. He is extending his love freely and graciously. So surrender your pride and your struggle. Let go of the guilt and the frustration. Welcome the Hound of Heaven and securely rest under his wings of love.